Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holacek, Ukrainian-American philosopher, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Eye on Ukraine. There's a famous quote often attributed to Albert Einstein, though we have no evidence that he ever said such a thing. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's where we're at today with Donald Trump, as he got off the phone yesterday with a 2.5 hour telephone conversation with Vladimir Putin. Strangely enough, and coincidentally, just prior to Volodymyr Zelensky's meeting with Trump today at the White House. Is this coincidence? Of course it's not. All right, I want to share with you someone who works for Vladimir Putin, Yuri Ushakov. He addressed the press after the conversation and gave them in just what was discussed. And I'll read this point by point and underscore certain things I think are noteworthy. Colleagues, today in the afternoon, Vladimir Putin had a telephone conversation, the eighth one, with US President Donald Trump. 8 conversations already in 10 months of being in office. Why are the two talking in the first place? Why do you sit down and discuss anything with a murderer, with the butcher of Bucha, with a child abductor, a war criminal? And yet this guy has had 8 conversations, all of which have been lengthy, and that to me is rather scary. It would be like imagining Winston Churchill after Hitler moving into Europe during the World War II and engaging in several conversations for the polite sort with Adolf Hitler and sort of urging him, well, let's get this war ended, buddy. Anyways, Ushakov writes, the conversation lasted almost 2.5 hours. Clearly, it was rather substantive and at the same time, very open and frank exchange. Our president started out by congratulating Donald Trump on his successful efforts to normalize the situation in the Gaza Strip. The U.S. president's peace work has been duly appreciated in the Middle East, in the United States itself, and in most countries around the world. Now here, I suspect a decent amount of time was spent on talking about Donald Trump to butter up the narcissist for what the phone call really was about. And all the while, you know what the phone call was about. It was about Zelensky coming over to Washington and discussing Trump sending Tomahawk missiles or selling Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine or its allies or some such thing. That was in Putin's mind the whole time. But that's not Putin's modus operandi. He's going to chit-chat for the better part of an hour and a half, tell Trump how handsome he is, how great he is, how strong he is, just how the work that he's been doing in the United States and across the globe is so well appreciated by Russia, right? So butter the man up, brown nose. Naturally, the Russian side outlined its principles position in favor of a comprehensive Middle East settlement on a generally recognized international legal basis that would ensure lasting peace for all the peoples in the region. Special emphasis on the conversation was placed on the Ukraine crisis. La-di-da. Vladimir Putin provided a detailed assessment of the current situation, stressing Russia's interest in achieving a peaceful resolution through political and diplomatic methods. Astonishing to me. He's had every opportunity in the past to encourage and work towards peaceful settlement, and he's walked away from every single one of them, doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. It's the part I like. In particular, it was noted that during the special military operation, the Russian armed forces hold full strategic initiative along the entire line of contact. What a load of bullshit that is. The Russian front is imploding. Soldiers are crippled, haven't eaten in days, do not have fresh water, and so forth. And the morale is low. They're fighting for their lives. Under these circumstances, the Kyiv regime resorts to terrorist methods attacking civilian targets and energy infrastructure facilities, to which we are forced to respond accordingly. So in other words, the reason why Russia's been attacking uh, um, energy infrastructure facilities and civilian targets because Kyiv's been doing that, which is a load of garbage, right? Russian rationalization. Now, Donald Trump repeatedly emphasized the imperative of establishing peace in Ukraine at the earliest opportunity. The notion that the Russian-Ukrainian conflict has proven the most intractable issue in all peacekeeping efforts of the U.S. president was palpably evident, a little redundant there, is it not, throughout his remarks during the conversation. All right, let's just agree with whatever Trump said. Trump said, I thought this would be able to sell it one day, but this is really hard. And Putin said, yeah, it's really hard. I agree with you. So many different things. We need to get at those root causes, right? In this context, Trump, naturally mentioned his successes in settling 8 other regional conflicts, all right? Instead of the new mantra for Trump, Trump used to repeat ad nauseum till everybody would get sick, that if I had been president, the war would never started. Now, instead of talking about that, instead of talking about the war not having started, he's going to talk about how his successes in settling wars, right? He's settled 8 wars already. It is noteworthy that one of the U.S. president's key arguments centered on the premise that the resolution of the conflict in Ukraine would open up tremendous, and he stressed this, tremendous prospects of the development of U.S.-Russian economic cooperation. Now, I want to say what we do no trade with Russia right now, almost no trade. It'd be like a wealthy man walking up to a beggar on the street and engaging in conversation and discussing the possibilities for fruitful exchange of goods. Russia is in a state of collapse, and Russia has nothing to offer us, anyone at this time. It needs to reboot, and that'll take many, many years for it's back up on its feet, thanks to what Putin has done to the economy. This notion of economic cooperation is garbage. Both sides spoke of the profound mutual affinity between the peoples of the two countries, which was so vividly demonstrated to the Second World War. The Great Patriotic War comes up again. And I'm sure Putin mentioned that, without Russian cooperation, the war would never have been won. It was underscored that the current state of bilateral relations appears paradoxical against this backdrop. So how can there be tension between the U.S. and Russia given the past successes in World War II and other issues along the line, other wars, presumably? Now, here we get to the point. After all this chit-chat, all this ancillary exchange of pleasantries and things, the issue of potential supplies of long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine was also raised. I love this part. Vladimir Putin reiterated his position that Tomahawks would not change the situation on the battlefield. Bullshit, they would change it remarkably, but would inflict substantial damage to relations between our countries, to say nothing of the prospects for a peaceful settlement. What relations are there between the U.S. and Russia? The ones in Trump's head, I don't think anybody in the Congress, Republicans included, thinks that there's anything special going on between the U.S. and Russia. In this context, it is worthy of note that the presidents discussed the possibility of holding another personal meeting. This was a very significant development. It was agreed that representatives of both countries would immediately begin preparations for the summit, which could potentially, redundant again, be organized in Budapest, for instance, and that's presumably where it's going to be held. Rubio is going to meet with Lavrov prior to that, presumably, at least that was discussed, and Trump is going to meet with Putin. Another stall tactic, just like the meeting in Alaska was. Nothing ever happened in Alaska, but they decided to get together, and Trump said, well, this was a very, very fruitful meeting, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I iterate that and reiterate that. On a separate note, it should be mentioned that our president highly praised personal efforts of the First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump, in reuniting Russian and Ukrainian children with their families, and asked the U.S. president to convey his very best wishes to his spouse. Reuniting Russian children with their families? I don't know of any instances of Ukrainians abducting Russian children and grooming them to be future mothers or future soldiers in the Ukrainian army. It's just the opposite. Projection, projection, projection. Overall, I would say that the telephone contact between the presidents of Russia was quite useful, and two leaders agreed to maintain contact. It's a very frightening notion that these two leaders would come together and be discussing anything of any importance. As I said before, I don't know why the US president would have any inclination to want to discuss anything with Putin. He needs to be removed from power. He needs to be exterminated. And the Russian people themselves, as they're rising up yesterday in St. Petersburg and chanting and singing Swan Lake and singing for the removal of Vladimir Putin, it might be happening sooner than later. And we have a U.S. president, buying into the slop that the Russians maintain, the aggression on the front line all over the place, and Ukraine's not doing anything in the war. And of course, I think Trump's probably going to buy into that once again. After calling Russia a paper tiger, now he thinks it's a full-fledged, mature, and dangerous Kodiak bear. Anyways, Trump responds to that and in his Truth Social, of course, and iterates that, talks about Rubio going to meet with Lavrov, and iterates some of the same points and talks about this being a very, very productive conversation. He said this ad nauseum, right? And again, doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. Okay, this is again another instance of Trump being buffaloed by Putin. TTFN, I hope you like this, and please share the video with others and like it. And TTFN.